3D rendering and saving. 3D rendering and saving. So what about 3D rendering and saving? Not here please now. In Photoshop CS6, 3D functionality was part of Photoshop Extended, by the way, and all features in Photoshop Extended are part of Photoshop, and Photoshop doesn't have a separate Extended offering, by the way. And how to change 3D render setting. How to change 3D render setting. By the way, render setting determine how 3D models are drawn, and Photoshop installs several presets with common setting, by the way, and customize setting to create your own presets. And not here please now. Render settings are layer specific, and if a document contains multiple 3D layers, you should specify a separate and render setting for each, by the way. And how to select a render preset. How to select a render preset. By the way, the standard render preset is default, and which displays the visible surfaces of models and wireframes and vertices and presets, and reveal the underlying structure. To combine a solid and wireframe rendering, and you have to choose the solid wireframe preset. To view a model as a simple box reflecting its outermost dimensions, and you have to choose a bounding box preset. We have steps here now. Step number 1. At the top of the 3D panel, you should click the scan button. Step number 2. In the lower half of the panel, you should choose an option from the preset menu, by the way. And like this screenshot now. This image now explains for you an installed render presets. And yes, meaning default quality set to interactive, and DBS meaning default quality set to ray traced and ground plane visible, and CS meaning bounding box, and GS meaning deep map, and DS meaning hidden wireframe, and FS meaning line illustration, and GS meaning normals, and HS meaning parent mask, and IS meaning shaded illustration, and GS meaning shaded vertex, and KS meaning shaded wireframe, and LS meaning solid wireframe, and TLS meaning transparent bounding box outline, and NS meaning transparent bounding box, and OS meaning two-sided, and BS meaning vertex, and QS meaning wireframe. And the two-sided preset applies only to cross sections, by the way, and displaying a solid model on one half of the section and a wireframe on the other. How to customize render setting. How to customize render setting. We have steps here now. Step number 1. At the top of the 3D panel, you should click the scan button, by the way. Step number 2. To the right of the render setting menu, click edit. Step number 3. Optional again. To see the effects of a new setting as you make changes, you should select preview or deselect this option to slightly improve performance. And by the way, to specify unique setting for each half of a cross section, you should click the cross section buttons, by the way, at the top of the dialog box. And step number 4. Enable face or edge and vertex and volume or stereo rendering by clicking the check boxes on the left side of the dialog box. Then adjust the related setting below. And by the way, for information about volume options used primarily with DICOM images, you should to see view the 3D volume in different render modes, by the way. And what about face options? Face options is meaning that face options determine how model surfaces appear. And face style is meaning that draws surfaces using any of these methods. And the solid is meaning that draws without shadows or reflections using the GPU on an OpenGL video card. And what about unlit texture? It's meaning that draws without lighting and instead displaying only the selected texture option, and diffuse is selected by default. And what about flat? Flat is meaning that applies the same surface normal for all vertices in a face and creating a faceted look. And what about constant? Constant is meaning that replaces texture with currently specified color. And by the way, to adjust face and edge or vertex color, you should to click the color box. And what about bounding box? Bounding box is meaning that displays boxes reflecting the outermost dimensions of each component, by the way. And what about normals? Normals is meaning that displays X and Y and Z components for surface normals in different RGB colors. And what about Deep Map? Deep Map is meaning that displays a gray model using luminosity to reveal deeps. And what about Bent Mask? Bent Mask is meaning that displays bentable regions as white and oversampled regions in red and undersampled regions in blue. And should to see identify bentable areas. What about texture? Texture is meaning that when face style is set to unlit texture, it specifies the texture map. And what about render for final output? Render for final output is meaning that for exported video, animations produces smoother shadows and realistics, color bleeds from reflected objects and environment. This option, by the way, require more processing time, however. And what about reflections and refraction shadows? What about reflections and refraction shadows? It's meaning that show or hide these ray traced rendering features, by the way. And what about remove back faces? Remove back faces is meaning that hides surfaces on the back of two-sided components. And what about edge options? Edge options is meaning that edge options determine how wireframe lines appear, by the way. And what about edge style? Edge style is meaning that reflects the constant and flat and solid and bounding box options described for face style above, by the way. And what about crease threshold? Crease threshold is meaning adjusts the number of structure lines that appear in the model. And a crease or line is formed by the way, is formed when two polygons in a model come together at a particular angle. And if edges, by the way, meet an angle below the crease threshold setting from 0 to 180, the line they form is removed, by the way, and at a setting of 0, the entire wireframe is displayed. And what about line width? Line width is meaning that specifies width in pixels. And what about remove back faces? Remove back faces is meaning that hides edges on the back of two-sided components. And what about remove hidden lines? Remove hidden lines is meaning that removes lines that foreground lines overlap. And what about vertex options? Vertex options is meaning that vertex options adjust the appearance of vertex and intersections of polygons that make up the wireframe model. And what's the meaning of vertex style? Vertex style is meaning reflects the constant and flat and solid and bounding box options described for face style above. And radius is meaning determines the pixel radius of each vertex, by the way. And remove back faces. What about remove back faces? Is meaning that hides vertex on the back of two-sided components. And what about remove hidden vertex? It's meaning removes vertex for the foreground vertex overlap. And what about stereo options? Stereo options is meaning that stereo options adjust setting for images that will either be viewed with red-blue glasses or printed to objects that include a lenticular lens. And what about stereotype? Stereotype is meaning that it specifies red or blue for images viewed with colored glasses or vertical interlaced for lenticular prints. And what about parallax? Parallax is meaning that adjusts the distance between the two stereo cameras, and higher setting increase three-dimensional depths, but reduce depths of field, making items, by the way, ahead of or behind the focal plane appear out of focus. And what about lenticular spacing? Lenticular spacing is meaning that for vertically interlaced images, and specifies how many lines per inch the lens has. And what about focal plane? Focal plane is meaning that determines the position of the focal plane relative to the center of the model's bounding box, and enter negative values to move the plane forward and positive values to move it backward. How to save or delete a render preset? How to save or delete a render preset? We have steps. Step number 1. At the top of the 3D panel, you should click the skin button firstly. Step number 2. Click render setting. Step number 3. Do either of the following. To save a preset, customize setting and then click the save button. And after that, to delete a preset, you should select it from the preset menu firstly, and then click the delete button or delete icon. And what about render a 3D file for final output? Render a 3D file for final output. By the way, when you have finished working with your 3D file, you can create a final render to produce the highest quality version for output to web print or animation. And the final rendering, by the way, uses ray tracing and a higher sampling rate to capture more realistic lighting and shadow effects. And you can use final render mode to enhance the following effects in your 3D scan, like image-based lighting and global ambient color, and lighting from object reflectance color bridge, and reduced noise in soft shadows. And not here please now. A final render, by the way, can be time consuming depending on the model or lighting and maps in your 3D scan. We have steps. Step number 1. Make any necessary adjustments to your model, including lighting and shadow effects. And by the way, you don't need to change anti-alias setting for the scan before rendering. By default, the best setting is used. Step number 2. At the top of the 3D panel, you should click the scan button firstly, and then click the scan entry in the list below. Step number 3. From the quality menu in the lower half of the panel, you should select Ray Traced Final, and after the render is complete, you can flatten the 3D scan for output in another format, and composite the 3D scan, by the way, with 2D content or print directly from the 3D layer. And by the way, for exported video animations, render for final output is available, by the way, as an option in the 3D render setting dialog box. And you should to see customize render setting, by the way. How to save and export 3D files. How to save and export 3D files. To preserve the 3D content in a file, you should to save the file in Photoshop format firstly, or another supported image format. And also you can export a 3D layer as a file in a supported 3D file format. How to export a 3D layer. How to export a 3D layer. By the way, you can export 3D layers in all supported 3D formats, and Collada, DAE, Wavefront, OBJ, and U3D, and Google Earth for KMZ. When choosing an export format, consider the following factors, by the way. Wavefront OBJ format doesn't save camera setting, by the way, lights or animation, and only Collada DAE saves the render setting. To export a 3D layer, do the following. We have steps. Step number 1. You should choose 3D firstly, then choose export 3D layer, and then number 2. You should choose a format for exporting textures, like U3D and KMZ support JPG or APNG as texture formats, and DAE and OBJ support all for Photoshop supported image formats for textures, by the way. And step number 3, optional. If exporting to U3D format, you can choose an encoding option, by the way, like ECMA 1 is compatible with Acrobat 7.0, ESMA 3 is compatible, by the way, with Acrobat 8.0, and provides some mesh compression. And step number 4, click OK to export. So what about limitations while exporting to the 3D format? What about limitations while exporting to the 3D format? Ensure that any 3D layers that you are exporting as U3D format have only trigonal object geometry, and additionally, while exporting 3D layers as you 3D, keep the following limitations in mind. Higher level primitives such as NU, RBS, splines, and curves are not supported, by the way. And after that, texture mapping is limited to only one diffuse map per material, and ambient and specular and luminous or opacity texture maps are not supported, by the way. And after that, material animation is not supported actually. And how to save a 3D file? How to save a 3D file? To preserve 3D model position and lighting and render mode and cross sections, you should to save files with 3D layers in BSD or PSP or TIFF or PDF format. And also you have to choose file firstly, then save as, then save or file, and save as or select Photoshop BSD and Photoshop PDF or TIFF format, and then click OK.